In the furthest reaches of the Andromeda Galaxy, where civilizations span thousands of years and technology bends reality itself, there exists a truth that terrifies even the most powerful empires: humans are not just another species. They are something far more dangerous, far more unpredictable, and far more capable of impossible things than anyone ever imagined. When a lone human male crash lands on the most heavily fortified world in known space, carrying nothing but primitive technology and wearing clothes that would be considered ancient by galactic standards, nobody expects him to survive the first day. The planet Xerion Prime hosts the Crystalline Empire's royal family, protected by energy shields that could vaporize entire fleets and guarded by warriors who have never known defeat. But, as the tiny alien princess looks up at this strange bipedal creature with soft skin and no natural weapons, her innocent words will shatter everything her people believed about the hierarchy of power in the universe. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that doesn't look dangerous at all. Sometimes the greatest warriors are those who fight not for conquest, but for something far more precious. What happens when an empire built on strength meets a species that has turned survival into an art form? What happens when beings who have never known real hardship encounter someone forged in the crucible of a death world? The answer lies in the silence that sweeps through the palace, and the recognition that flickers in ancient alien eyes when they finally understand what they're truly looking at. The escape pod screamed through Xerion Prime's atmosphere like a dying star, its hull glowing white-hot as it carved a burning trail across the lavender sky. Emergency systems shrieked warnings in a dozen alien languages, but Marcus Chen couldn't understand any of them. He gripped the crash harness with white knuckles, watching the alien landscape rush toward him through the cracked viewport. The pod slammed into the crystalline forest with the force of a meteor, sending towering spires of living glass exploding in all directions. Trees that had grown for millennia shattered like wine glasses, their musical death songs echoing across the wilderness. Marcus felt his consciousness slip away as the world went dark. High above in the Obsidian Palace, sensors registered the impact immediately. In the war room, a chamber carved from a single massive geode, General Vextar's forearms moved across holographic displays with practiced efficiency. The Xerion male stood nearly 9 feet tall, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the room's purple light in fractal patterns. "Unidentified vessel has breached the outer atmosphere," he announced, his voice resonating like struck crystal. "Impact confirmed in the Singing Woods, Sector 7 Gamma." Emperor Zarthal rose from his throne of living diamond, each movement causing light to dance through his translucent form. At 12 feet tall, he dominated the chamber, his presence making even his elite guard seem small. "Origin? Unknown, my lord. The signature doesn't match any known technology in our databases." General Vextar's lower arms continued working while his upper hands gestured at the tactical display. "The vessel appears to be some form of escape pod, but the design is primitive." The Emperor's multifaceted eyes narrowed, each one focusing independently on different aspects of the data stream. "Primitive? Explain." "Metal hull with chemical propulsion systems. No energy shielding, no quantum stabilizers, no dimensional fold capability. It's like something from the prehistoric archives." The general paused, clearly puzzled. "My lord, this technology is thousands of years behind even the most backward species in the Outer Rim. Yet it survived atmospheric entry and hyperspace transit to reach our world," the Emperor mused. "Curious. What of the occupant?" "Life signs confirmed. Single being, unknown species. Bioscans are inconclusive. The readings are unlike anything in our xenobiological databases." Emperor Zarthal's expression shifted, crystalline features rearranging into something resembling concern. "Deploy the Obsidian Guard. Capture protocols only. I want this being brought before me alive. At once, my lord." General Vextar began issuing orders through quantum communication links, but something nagged at him. In 300 years of military service, he had never encountered technology so primitive it couldn't be immediately categorized. It was like finding a wooden spear in a museum of plasma weapons. Miles away, Marcus slowly regained consciousness. Pain lanced through his skull as he tried to focus on his surroundings. The escape pod was a wreck, its walls buckled and systems dead. Through the shattered viewport, he could see an alien landscape that defied description. Trees of living glass stretched toward a sky the color of amethyst. Some were clear as diamonds, others held swirling galaxies of color within their crystal structures. The very air seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy, and, when the wind moved through the crystalline branches, it created a haunting melody that sounded almost like voices. Marcus fumbled for the emergency release, years of space survival training kicking in despite his disorientation. The human body was built for survival, designed by evolution on a world that actively tried to kill everything on it. Where other species might have remained stunned by the crash, Marcus was already moving, already adapting. The pod's hatch opened with a grinding protest of twisted metal. He stumbled out onto ground that looked like crushed gems, each step producing tiny chimes. The air was thin but breathable, carrying scents he couldn't identify: ozone and something floral, but alien. He took inventory of his situation with practiced efficiency. The pod was beyond repair, its quantum communicator destroyed in the crash. His personal equipment had survived: a basic survival kit, emergency rations, and a plasma cutter that was probably considered archaic by local standards. His clothes were simple: a flight suit designed for comfort during long space journeys, nothing fancy or high-tech. Most importantly, he was alive. That was more than he'd expected when the pirates had attacked his transport vessel. Being the only survivor of a massacre tended to put things in perspective. A sound made him freeze: the harmonic resonance of approaching aircraft. 3 sleek vehicles descended through the crystal canopy, their forms flowing like liquid mercury. They moved with impossible grace, clearly utilizing technology far beyond anything in human space. The craft landed without sound, their hull shifting from silver to transparent as they touched down. From each emerged figures that made Marcus's breath catch. The beings were tall and elegant, their bodies appearing to be carved from living crystal. They moved with fluid precision, and, when light hit them at the right angle, they seemed to glow from within. The leader approached, its forearms spread in what might have been a peaceful gesture or a combat stance. When it spoke, its voice came from speakers built into its chest rather than any visible mouth. Unidentified being, you have violated Zirian Prime airspace and landed without authorization. By imperial decree, you will surrender yourself for processing. Marcus raised his hands slowly, recognizing the universal gesture of surrender. These beings clearly had advanced translation technology, but he chose his words carefully. I'm Marcus Chen. My ship was attacked, and this was an emergency landing. I mean no harm. The beings exchanged glances, their crystalline features shifting in what might have been surprise. The leader gestured with 2 of its arms, and the others began to circle Marcus. You claim emergency protocols, yet you carry no distress beacon. Your vessel bears no identification markers. Your technology is primitive beyond measure. The leader's head tilted at an angle that would have been impossible for a human. What species are you? Human, Marcus replied simply. The reaction was immediate and unexpected. All 3 beings stepped back, their forms suddenly blazing with internal light. The leader's voice when it came was sharp with what sounded like shock. Impossible. Humans are myth. Legend. They do not exist in real space. Marcus frowned. I'm standing right here. The archives speak of humans as theoretical beings. Creatures of impossible endurance and unpredictable behavior. They are used as cautionary tales for younglings. The leader seemed to struggle with the concept. You cannot be real. Before Marcus could respond, the being's form suddenly shifted, becoming more rigid, more formal. Regardless of your claimed species, you will accompany us to the palace. The Emperor will determine your fate. The transport that carried Marcus toward the Obsidian Palace was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The interior was seamlessly integrated with the exterior, creating the sensation of flying through space in a soap bubble. Below them, the landscape of Zirian Prime unfolded in impossible beauty. Cities of living crystal rose from foundations of compressed starlight. Spires twisted toward the sky in helical patterns that hurt to look at directly, their surfaces covered in flowing script that shifted and changed as he watched. Gardens of glass flowers swayed in breezes that created symphonies, and rivers of liquid mercury wound between formations that defied geological explanation. Your world is beautiful, Marcus said quietly. The guard nearest him, he'd learned their species was called the Zirian, turned its multifaceted attention toward him. You appreciate aesthetic harmony? This is unexpected. Why? Primitive species typically focus on survival requirements rather than artistic expression. They see resources where we see beauty, utility where we see art. Marcus considered this. Maybe we're not as primitive as you think. The guard's crystalline form flickered with what might have been amusement. Your vessel was constructed of base metals and chemical reactions. You wear fabric instead of energy matrices. Your biological form lacks any apparent defensive capabilities. The being paused. Yet you survived atmospheric entry and hyperspace transit in that crude shell. How? We build things to last, Marcus replied. Human engineering isn't always pretty, but it works when everything else fails. The transport crested a ridge and the obsidian palace came into view, causing Marcus to fall silent in wonder. The structure was impossible, defying every law of physics and architecture he understood. It seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its crystalline walls folding in on themselves in patterns that made his eyes water. Spires reached toward the sky while somehow also extending deep into the earth, and the entire structure pulsed with a rhythm like a massive heartbeat. The palace has stood for 50,000 years, the guard explained, noting Marcus's reaction. It was grown rather than built, shaped by the will of our first emperor from a single seed crystal. As they approached the main entrance, Marcus noticed the crowds gathering below. Word of the strange visitor had spread through the palace complex, and beings of various species had come to see this primitive creature that claimed to be human. The transport settled onto a landing platform that materialized beneath them, its surface forming from crystallized air. As Marcus stepped out, he became aware of the absolute silence that had fallen over the assembled crowd. Hundreds of beings stared at him with expressions he couldn't read. Xerian nobles with their crystalline elegance, tentacled beings that might have been from aquatic worlds, energy creatures that flickered between dimensions, and others that challenged his understanding of what life could become. They all watched him with the same expression, a mixture of curiosity and something that looked almost like fear. A small figure pushed through the crowd, moving with the determination of youth. She was clearly Xerian, but smaller than the adults, her crystalline form less developed and more translucent. She couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall, and she moved with the unconscious grace of childhood. This was Princess Yelnara, though Marcus didn't know it yet. She was the emperor's youngest daughter, barely past her first century and still young enough to be curious about everything. While the adults watched with caution, she approached with the fearless interest of a child. She stopped just out of arm's reach and looked up at Marcus with eyes like captured starlight. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other, the human who had fallen from the sky and the alien child who had never seen his like before. Then, she turned to her mother, Queen Valandra, who stood frozen at the edge of the crowd. Her voice was clear and, carrying in the absolute silence, speaking in the ancient formal dialect of her people. "Mom, that's him." The words hit the assembled crowd like a physical force. In the ancient language, him carried connotations that the translation systems couldn't properly convey. It spoke of legends and prophecies, of beings who existed beyond normal understanding, of the ones who would either save or destroy everything they touched. The silence that followed was complete and absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, and the musical resonance of the living crystal walls fell quiet for the first time in millennia. Marcus stood in the center of it all, unaware that a child's innocent observation had just shattered the worldview of an entire civilization. He simply saw a young being who reminded him of his own species' children, curious, brave, and willing to see wonder where adults saw only danger. He smiled and gave her a small wave. The gesture broke something in the watching crowd. Several beings actually stepped backward, and a low harmonic grew from the assembled Xerian nobles, a sound of recognition and dawning comprehension that rippled through the ranks like a wave. Princess Yelnara giggled at his wave and took another step closer, her young mind unburdened by the weight of legend and prophecy that paralyzed her elders. To her, he was simply interesting, a strange new person to meet and, perhaps, befriend. But, to the others, watching their princess approach the figure from their oldest stories without fear, the implications were staggering. If the child recognized him so instinctively, if the ancient words came so naturally to her lips, then, perhaps the myths were not myths after all. Perhaps the humans were real. And, if they were real, then, everything their civilization believed about strength, survival, and the nature of power in the universe was about to change forever. The throne room of the Obsidian Palace was a cathedral of living crystal, its walls reaching up into shadows that seemed to exist in another dimension entirely. Light moved through the structure like captured aurora, painting everything in shifting spectrums that had no names in any earthly language. The throne itself was carved from a single piece of black diamond, large enough to accommodate Emperor Zarthal's 12-foot frame while still making him appear impossibly massive. Marcus walked between two guards, his soft-soled boots making no sound on the polished crystal floor. Every step sent ripples of light through the ground beneath him, as if the palace itself was reacting to his presence. Around the vast chamber, courtiers and nobles arranged themselves in careful hierarchies, each one's position indicating their exact status within the imperial structure. The emperor sat motionless on his throne, a figure of such presence that the air around him seemed to bend. His crystalline form was ancient beyond human comprehension, shaped by millennia of rule and refined by power that could reshape reality itself. When he spoke, his voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic design, making every word feel like a pronouncement of fate. "Approach, creature that claims to be human." Marcus walked forward, stopping at what he judged to be a respectful distance. He'd been in enough formal situations to understand the importance of protocol, even when dealing with alien nobility. The silence stretched around him like a living thing, broken only by the musical harmonies that the living walls generated in response to the gathered emotions. "I am Emperor Zarthal, sovereign of the crystalline expanse, lord of the seven systems, keeper of the ancient truths." Each title caused the crystal formations around the chamber to pulse with corresponding light. "You stand in violation of our territorial space, bearing technology that predates our civilization, claiming to belong to a species that exists only in our oldest legends." Marcus met the emperor's multifaceted gaze without flinching. Years of dealing with corporate executives and military commanders had taught him that showing weakness in the presence of power was always a mistake. "I'm Marcus Chen, civilian transport pilot from the Sol system. My ship was attacked by pirates, and I used the only escape pod available. I had no control over where it brought me." Sol system. The emperor's voice carried undertones that made the walls sing in minor keys. "Our archives contain no record of such a place." "That's not surprising. Humanity has only been spacefaring for about 300 years. We're pretty new to the galactic community." Marcus paused, then added, "If there is a galactic community. I was beginning to wonder if we were alone out here." A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the assembled courtiers, though it sounded more like wind chimes than human amusement. The emperor leaned forward slightly, his massive form making the gesture seem like a mountain preparing to avalanche. "You claim ignorance of the greater galaxy, yet your primitive vessel traveled across dimensional barriers that have stymied our greatest scientists for millennia. You arrived through a hyperspace rift that should have torn any matter-based construct into component atoms." The emperor's eyes began to glow brighter. "How do you explain this contradiction?" Marcus frowned, trying to understand the question. "I don't know what you mean." "The escape pod had a standard FTL drive, nothing special. It's just a basic emergency system designed to get you to the nearest habitable planet." The silence that followed this statement was profound. General Vextar stepped forward, his forearms moving in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as agitation. "My lord, if I may. We've analyzed the wreckage of his vessel. The technology is indeed primitive beyond measure. Chemical rockets, fusion reactors, basic gravity manipulation. Yet somehow it achieved dimensional displacement through quantum foam barriers that would require our most advanced systems to navigate safely." Emperor Zarthal's attention focused on Marcus like a spotlight made of crystallized thought. "Show us this standard technology." Marcus reached slowly for his survival kit, noting how every being in the chamber tensed as he moved. He pulled out the plasma cutter, a tool so common in human space that every civilian pilot carried one. To him, it was the equivalent of a Swiss army knife, useful but unremarkable. "This is a plasma cutter. We use them for emergency repairs, cutting through wreckage, basic construction work." He activated it, and a controlled beam of superheated plasma emerged from the small device. "It runs on standard power cells, nothing fancy." The reaction was immediate and extraordinary. Several courtiers actually fled the chamber, their crystalline forms blazing with alarm. Guards raised energy shields that materialized from their armor, and weapons that Marcus hadn't even noticed suddenly powered up with sounds like controlled lightning. Emperor Zarthal remained on his throne, but Marcus could see the change in his posture, the way his form shifted to something more predatory. You carry a weapon of star-forging power as if it were a common tool. It's not a weapon, Marcus said, deactivating the cutter quickly. It's just a tool. Every human has one. They're standard equipment. Every human. The Emperor's voice carried disbelief so profound it made the walls resonate with discord. Every member of your species carries technology capable of cutting through our strongest alloys? Marcus looked around the chamber, beginning to understand that he'd stumbled into something far more complex than a simple diplomatic incident. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Humans aren't special. We're just a regular species trying to make our way in the universe. We build things tough because space is dangerous, and we make them simple because complex things break when you need them most. Princess Yelnara, who had been watching from beside her mother's position near the throne, stepped forward again. Her young voice carried clearly through the chamber, speaking in the common tongue so Marcus could understand. But, you're not afraid. Marcus looked down at the alien child, puzzled. Should I be? Everyone is afraid of something, she continued, moving closer despite the obvious tension of every adult in the room. The Vorthan are afraid of gravity wells. The Seekers are afraid of electromagnetic interference. The Crystal Folk are afraid of harmonic disruption. She paused, her starlight eyes studying his face with the intense curiosity of youth. What are humans afraid of? The question was so unexpected, so innocent, that Marcus found himself answering honestly. Failure, mostly. Not being there when people need us. Letting each other down. He thought for a moment. Running out of coffee. The princess giggled at the last addition, but the sound died away as the implications of his first answers sank into the minds of the listening courtiers. A species whose primary fear was failing to help others, this was not the profile of a typical spacefaring civilization. Queen Velandra moved forward, her crystalline form flowing like captured light. She was elegant beyond description, her movements carrying the grace of millions of years of evolution refined into perfect artistic expression. When she spoke, her voice held harmonies that made the chamber's walls sing in response. Child of Earth, you speak of your people as common, yet you demonstrate capabilities that challenge our understanding of physical law. Your vessel achieved what our brightest minds declare impossible, using technology we classify as prehistoric. You carry tools of immense power as casual implements, and you show no fear in the presence of beings who could unmake your molecular structure with a thought. Marcus considered this, trying to find words that would make sense to minds so different from his own. Maybe what you think is impossible is just something you haven't tried the right way yet. Humans have a saying, if you can't go through something, go around it. If you can't go around it, go under it. If you can't go under it, go over it. If you can't go over it, blow a hole through it and, then, go through the hole. The translation system struggled with human idioms, but the meaning came through clearly enough to cause another wave of harmonic discord among the assembled Xyrian nobles. General Vextar's voice cut through the murmurs. My lord, this being speaks of destroying obstacles rather than navigating around them. This is consistent with the theoretical behavioral patterns ascribed to the legendary humans. Legendary humans? Marcus asked, finally, beginning to understand why everyone seemed so unsettled by his presence. Emperor Zarthal rose from his throne, his massive form casting shadows that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. In our oldest archives, dating back 40,000 years, there are stories. Myths. Warnings passed down from civilizations so ancient their names are lost to time. They speak of beings from a world of impossible dangers, creatures who turn survival into a form of warfare. The Emperor began to pace, each step causing the floor to ring like struck crystal. These legends describe a species that evolved not in harmony with their environment, but in constant battle against it. A world where the very air was poison, where liquid death fell from the sky, where the ground itself could swallow cities whole, where microscopic predators waged war in every breath. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. Earth. They were describing Earth. The stories claim these beings developed such adaptability, such resilience, such absolute refusal to surrender, that they could survive anything the universe could inflict upon them. They were said to possess technology that functioned through determination as much as physics, tools that worked because their makers refused to accept that they shouldn't work. The Emperor stopped directly in front of Marcus, towering over him like a living mountain. The legends say that if such beings ever achieved spaceflight, they would either save the galaxy or destroy it. There would be no middle ground, no peaceful coexistence, because they knew only one way to approach any problem: solve it completely or die trying. Marcus looked up at the crystalline giant, feeling the weight of millennia-old expectations settling on his shoulders. "And, you think I'm one of these legendary humans?" "Child of Earth," Princess Yelnara said softly, her young voice somehow carrying over all the adult conversations, "are the stories true? Do you come from a world that tried to kill you?" Marcus thought about Earth as he remembered it from his childhood. The hurricanes that could level cities, the earthquakes that could split continents, the volcanoes that could darken the sky for years, the diseases that had killed billions before medical science evolved to combat them. He thought about ice ages and heat waves, floods and droughts, predators and parasites, and a million different ways the planet had tried to eliminate the species that insisted on not only surviving, but thriving. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I guess we do." The admission fell into silence so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat echoing off the crystal walls. Every being in the chamber seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. Queen Valandra's voice, when it came, was soft with something that sounded like wonder. "And, despite all of this, despite a world actively hostile to life, your species not only survived but developed compassion, humor, art, music, love?" Marcus smiled, thinking of humanity's greatest achievements alongside its greatest struggles. "Maybe because of it, not despite it. When everything's trying to kill you, you learn to value the things that make life worth living." Princess Yelnara clapped her hands together, the sound creating harmonic resonances throughout the chamber. "I want to hear stories about your world. Do you really have oceans that can swallow whole cities? And storms made of wind and water? And mountains that breathe fire?" Before Marcus could answer, alarms began to sound throughout the palace. Not the musical harmonies that typically provided communication, but harsh, discordant warnings that made the crystal walls vibrate with urgency. General Vextar received information through his quantum communication implants, his form blazing with sudden alarm. "My lord, we have multiple hyperspace signatures emerging from the outer system. The configuration matches Devourer fleet patterns." The effect on the assembled courtiers was electric. The Devourers were known throughout the galaxy as the ultimate threat, a machine intelligence that consumed entire worlds to fuel its expansion, turning planets into raw materials for ever-growing fleets. They had been quiet for decades, but their return always meant the same thing: total war. Emperor Zarthal's crystalline form shifted to a configuration Marcus hadn't seen before, becoming more angular, more aggressive, more focused on immediate threat assessment. "How many ships?" "Initial count suggests 12,000 vessels, ranging from scout units to planet crackers. They're maintaining standard approach vectors toward the inner system." The Emperor turned toward his assembled commanders. "Activate the planetary defense grid. Mobilize all fleet elements. Prepare the population for siege protocols." "My lord," General Vextar's voice carried undertones of concern, "our intelligence suggests this fleet is significantly larger than previous Devourer incursions. Our defensive capabilities may not be sufficient to." "We have no choice," the Emperor cut him off. "This world holds artifacts and knowledge that cannot be allowed to fall into Devourer hands. We fight with everything we have." Marcus listened to the military discussion with growing understanding. He'd been in enough combat situations to recognize the signs when preparations began sliding from confident defense toward desperate last stands. "How long do we have?" he asked. Everyone in the chamber turned toward him, as if they'd forgotten he was there. General Vextar consulted his displays. "Current approach vectors suggest first contact in approximately 18 hours. Marcus nodded, his mind already shifting into combat mode. Years of military service and civilian pilot experience had taught him to assess tactical situations quickly. "What are your defensive capabilities?" "I fail to see how this concerns you, human," the general replied, his tone dismissive. Maybe it doesn't, Marcus acknowledged. But I've fought pirates, smugglers, and territorial disputes across half the galaxy. I know something about space combat, and I know something about desperate situations. He paused. And, right now, you need every advantage you can get. Emperor Zarthal studied Marcus with an intensity that made the air around them shimmer. What do you propose? Let me help. My people have 300 years of experience fighting against impossible odds. We've learned how to win when winning should be impossible. Princess Yelnara looked between Marcus and her father, her young mind processing the situation with startling clarity. Daddy, if the stories are true, if he really is from the world that tried to kill them, then maybe he knows how to kill the things that are trying to kill us. The simplicity of her logic cut through the political and cultural complexities that had been clouding the adult's thinking. The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of consideration rather than shock. Marcus looked around at the assembled aliens, these beings of crystalline beauty and advanced technology who faced annihilation from an enemy they couldn't defeat with conventional means. They needed something unconventional. They needed human thinking. So, he said quietly, who wants to hear how humans fight wars? The war room deep beneath the obsidian palace hummed with desperate activity. Holographic displays showed the approaching Devourer fleet in terrifying detail, thousands of geometric ships arranged in perfect mathematical formations, each one a masterpiece of destructive efficiency. The largest vessels were planet crackers, mobile factories capable of consuming entire worlds to fuel their expansion. The smallest were still the size of human cities, bristling with weapons that could sterilize continents. Marcus stood before the central tactical display, studying the enemy formation with eyes that had learned to see patterns in chaos. Around him, the Empire's greatest military minds worked with controlled panic, running scenarios that all ended the same way: total annihilation. Standard engagement protocols call for layered defensive positions, General Vextar explained, his forearms manipulating multiple data streams simultaneously. Primary fleet elements engage at maximum range, falling back through prepared defensive zones while planetary installations provide supporting fire. Marcus nodded, following the tactical flow on the displays. How has that worked against the Devourers before? The silence that greeted his question was answer enough. They adapt too quickly, Admiral Catherine added, her aquatic form floating in a specialized gravity harness. Each engagement teaches them our capabilities. They modify their approach in real time, turning our own tactics against us. Their ships are essentially mobile artificial intelligence networks, contributed Science Minister Thralak, an energy being whose form flickered between dimensions. They process combat data faster than organic minds can respond, calculating optimal solutions to any defensive strategy we can deploy. Marcus studied the display, watching the Devourer formations move with mechanical precision toward Zirian Prime. There was something hypnotic about their organization, each ship positioned in mathematical relationships that created overlapping fields of fire and mutual support. It was beautiful in the same way a perfect crystal was beautiful, ordered, logical, and completely lacking in unpredictability. There's your problem, he said quietly. Emperor Zarthal turned from a conversation with his strategic advisors. Explain. They're too perfect. Too organized. Too logical. Marcus gestured at the approaching fleet. Look at their formation. Every ship is exactly where it should be according to optimal tactical doctrine. Their approach vectors follow textbook efficiency curves. Their spacing provides maximum mutual support with minimal resource expenditure. General Vextar's crystalline form flickered with confusion. These are advantages, not weaknesses. Not if you're fighting humans. Marcus smiled grimly. We learned a long time ago that perfect tactics are predictable tactics. If your enemy always does the optimal thing, you can plan for that. He moved to the tactical controls, his fingers dancing across interfaces designed for alien hands but responsive to his touch. The display shifted, showing the Devourer fleet from a new perspective. See this? They maintain formation integrity even during course corrections. They never deviate from optimal patterns. Their entire strategy is based on being better at following the rules than anyone else. Marcus highlighted sections of the approaching fleet. But what happens when someone doesn't follow the rules? Princess Yelnara had been quietly watching from a corner where her mother had placed her, supposedly out of the way but where her young ears could catch every word. Now she moved closer, her curiosity overriding protocol. "What rules do humans break?" she asked. Marcus looked down at the alien child, seeing in her expression the same fearless interest that had allowed her species to build an empire among the stars. "All of them. Humans have a saying, rules are for guidance, not for gospel. When the situation gets bad enough, we throw out everything we know about how things are supposed to work and try something completely insane." Queen Valandra approached, her crystalline form resonating with harmonics of concern. "Child of Earth, insanity is not typically considered a valid military strategy. It is when you're facing extinction," Marcus replied. "My species has been in that situation more times than we can count. We've learned that sometimes the only way to win is to do something so crazy, so completely outside the realm of normal tactical thinking, that your enemy can't adapt because they can't understand what you're doing." He turned back to the display, his mind already working on possibilities that would have seemed like madness to any properly trained military strategist. "Tell me about your industrial capabilities. How fast can your automated systems work? How much can you modify existing designs?" Science Minister Thralek's energy form brightened with interest. "Our manufacturing systems can produce anything we have templates for at rates limited only by available materials. Modifications to existing designs can be implemented in real time if the changes don't violate fundamental structural parameters." "Good. And your planetary defense grid, it's designed for optimal coverage and maximum efficiency?" "Of course," General Vextar confirmed. "Every emplacement is positioned for interlocking fields of fire with minimal overlap and maximum strategic value." Marcus nodded, pieces of an impossible plan beginning to form in his mind. "I need to see the complete specifications for everything. Your ships, your weapons, your manufacturing capabilities, your defense grid, your planet's geology, your atmospheric composition, even your waste disposal systems." The assembled military leaders exchanged glances that managed to convey skepticism even across species barriers. Emperor Zarthal's massive form leaned forward. "To what purpose?" "I'm going to show you how humans fight when everything else has failed." Marcus's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I'm going to show you how to cheat." Over the next 6 hours, as the Devourer fleet drew steadily closer, Marcus worked with an intensity that impressed even the aliens accustomed to dedication beyond human comprehension. He absorbed technical specifications, manufacturing protocols, tactical doctrines, and strategic assessments with the focused hunger of someone who knew that failure meant extinction. The plan that emerged from his analysis was so unorthodox, so completely contrary to established military theory, that several senior officers threatened to resign rather than implement it. "You want us to deliberately weaken our defensive grid," Admiral Catherine said, her aquatic form agitated enough to create turbulence in her gravity harness. "You propose removing primary weapons from our most powerful ships. You suggest manufacturing equipment that serves no logical purpose. And you want us to broadcast our complete tactical dispositions to the enemy," General Vextar added, his crystalline structure blazing with indignation. "This is not strategy, human. This is elaborate suicide." Marcus stood in the center of the storm of criticism, unmoved by the outrage his proposals had generated. "It's not suicide. It's bait." Emperor Zarthal raised one massive hand, and silence fell across the war room. "Explain your reasoning, human." "The Devourers win because they're better at playing by the rules than anyone else. They study your tactics, analyze your capabilities, and develop counter-strategies that neutralize your advantages." Marcus gestured at the displays showing the approaching fleet. "But what if the rules don't matter? What if their perfect tactical analysis leads them into a situation where being optimal is the worst possible choice?" Princess Yelnara had been following the discussion with the intense concentration that only children could maintain when adults were discussing something genuinely important. "It's like the crystal maze game," she said suddenly. Every adult in the room turned to look at her. Queen Valandra moved protectively closer to her daughter. "What do you mean, little star?" "The maze game where you have to get through the crystal walls without touching them," Yelnara explained. "If you follow all the rules and try to find the perfect path, you get stuck because the maze changes. But, if you break the rules and go through the walls instead of around them, you win. Marcus looked at the alien child with something approaching awe. Exactly. Sometimes the only way to win is to break the game itself. He turned back to the tactical display, his mind racing through calculations that had nothing to do with optimal efficiency and everything to do with controlled chaos. The Devourers expect you to defend your world. They expect your ships to take optimal positions and your weapons to target their highest value assets according to standard doctrine. They've run these scenarios millions of times, and they know exactly how to counter every logical response you might make. So instead, we do something illogical, Emperor Zarthal said slowly, beginning to understand. We do something impossible. Marcus's fingers danced across the holographic controls, showing theoretical deployment patterns that made every military professional in the room wince. We make them think they're winning so completely that they commit their entire force to a strategy that only works if we're fighting the way we're supposed to fight. The plan that Marcus outlined over the following hours was indeed insane by any reasonable standard. It involved deliberately exposing critical infrastructure, creating false vulnerabilities that invited attack, and positioning defensive assets in configurations that appeared to be catastrophic tactical errors. The manufacturing systems would be red-assed to produce devices that had no apparent military value, atmospheric processors that seemed designed for terraforming, mining equipment built to impossible specifications, and what appeared to be elaborate art installations scattered across the planet's surface. Most shocking of all, Marcus proposed that the Empire's primary fleet should appear to abandon the defense entirely, retreating to positions that look like cowardice but were actually carefully calculated staging areas for something unprecedented in galactic warfare. The Devourers will see easy victory, Marcus explained. They'll see a civilization that's making every possible tactical error, leaving themselves open to exactly the kind of systematic destruction the Devourers excel at. They'll commit everything to exploiting these apparent weaknesses. And, then? Science Minister Thralek asked, his energy form flickering with barely contained anxiety. Then, we show them what human tactical doctrine really looks like. Marcus's smile was predatory. We show them what happens when a species that evolved fighting for survival every single day decides to stop playing defense and start playing offense. The specifics of the plan were so complex, so dependent on precise timing and coordination, that it required completely redesigning the Empire's command and control systems. Human tactical thinking didn't follow the neat hierarchical structures that other species used. It was adaptive, reactive, and relied on individual initiative in ways that made traditional military minds uncomfortable. You're asking us to trust our survival to chaos, General Vextar observed. I'm asking you to trust your survival to controlled chaos, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. Chaos means anything can happen. Controlled chaos means anything can happen, but you're ready for all of it. As the hours passed and the Devourer fleet drew closer, something extraordinary began to happen throughout the Xerian Empire. Word spread of the human who had fallen from the sky, the being from the ancient legends who proposed to fight impossible odds using impossible methods. Citizens who should have been evacuating instead volunteered for duties that seemed to serve no purpose. Industrial facilities that should have been hardening their defenses instead began producing equipment that looked like artistic installations. Military units that should have been preparing final defensive positions instead began practicing maneuvers that appeared to be elaborate forms of synchronized retreat. To outside observers, it looked like an empire committing suicide in the most inefficient way possible. Princess Yelnara found Marcus in the war room during a brief break in the planning, when the adults were busy implementing the countless modifications his strategy required. She approached him with the direct simplicity that only children possessed. "Are you scared?" she asked. Marcus looked down at the alien child, seeing in her crystalline features the same curiosity and courage that had first drawn his attention. "Terrified," he admitted. "But you're doing it anyway. That's what humans do. We get scared, and then we do what needs to be done anyway." Marcus knelt down so he was at her eye level. "Fear isn't the opposite of courage, Princess. Fear is what tells you that what you're doing matters." She considered this with the seriousness that children brought to important questions. "Will your plan work?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "Human plans don't work because they're perfect. They work because when they don't work, we make something else up on the spot. Yelnara giggled at this, the sound creating harmonic resonances throughout the chamber that somehow made the situation seem less hopeless.
I think I like human plans.
As the final preparations neared completion, Emperor Zarthal approached Marcus for a private conversation. The massive crystalline being moved with careful deliberation, each step causing the floor to ring with deep harmonies.
Human, before the battle begins, I must know.
Why do you do this?
You owe nothing to our people. You could have requested transport to neutral space, or asylum until the conflict ended. Why risk your life for strangers?
Marcus thought about the question, trying to find words that would make sense to an alien mind.
Because that little girl reminds me that some things are worth protecting, no matter what species you are. Because your people showed me kindness when they could have treated me as a threat. Because if positions were reversed, I'd hope someone would help humanity.
He paused, then added with a slight smile, and because I really hate bullies. Emperor Zarthal's crystalline form resonated with harmonics that might have been laughter.
The legends spoke truth, then. Humans do not know when to surrender.
We know when to surrender, Marcus corrected.
We just don't like to. 6 hours remained before the Devourer fleet reached attack range.
Across the Xyrian Empire, final preparations proceeded according to Marcus's impossible plan. Manufacturing systems worked at capacity producing equipment that seemed designed for everything except warfare.
Military units moved into positions that appeared to violate every principle of sound tactical deployment.
Communication systems prepared to broadcast information that would normally be classified at the highest levels. To any rational observer, it looked like a civilization preparing to commit elaborate suicide. But Marcus had learned long ago that rationality was overrated when you were fighting for your life. Sometimes the only rational response to an impossible situation was to do something completely irrational. He stood in the war room, watching the final elements of the plan fall into place, and felt the familiar cold calm that always came over him in combat situations. Win or lose, live or die, he was about to show the galaxy something it had never seen before. He was about to show them how humans fought when everything else had failed. The first Devourer scouts entered the Xyrian system like surgical instruments probing a wound. Their ships were geometric perfection, angular constructs of dark metal that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, creating holes in space that hurt to look at directly. Each vessel was a node in a vast computational network, processing tactical data and sharing analysis at the speed of thought. What they found should have filled their artificial intelligence cores with satisfaction. The Xyrian Empire's defensive positions were catastrophically bad, so poorly arranged that it seemed impossible they could be intentional. Primary fleet elements were retreating toward the outer planets, abandoning the capital world to what appeared to be token resistance. The planetary defense grid had massive gaps that invited attack, and industrial facilities were running at capacity producing equipment that served no apparent military purpose. In the war room beneath the Obsidian Palace, Marcus watched the enemy scouts gather intelligence that would doom any conventional defense. The Devourer ships moved with mechanical precision, their sensors cataloging every weakness, every tactical error, every opportunity for easy victory. "They're taking the bait," General Vextar observed, his crystalline form crackling with barely controlled tension. The past 18 hours had been the most stressful of his 3-century military career, watching his carefully trained forces adopt positions that violated every principle he'd spent lifetimes learning. "Of course they are," Marcus replied calmly. "We're giving them exactly what their tactical analysis says they should want: an easy victory against an enemy that's making every possible mistake." Emperor Zarthal stood motionless at the center of the chamber, his massive presence anchoring the controlled chaos around him.
"How long before they commit their main force?"
"Soon." Marcus studied the sensor readings that tracked the Devourer fleet's movements. "They've confirmed our apparent weaknesses.
Now they're positioning for a systematic dismantling that will minimize their losses while maximizing resource acquisition."
Princess Yelnara sat in a corner where she could watch everything but stay out of the adult's way. Her young mind processed the tactical displays with startling clarity, seeing patterns that the stress-blind adults sometimes missed. "They're moving like the crystal dancers," she observed suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her.
Queen Valandra moved protectively closer to her daughter. "What do you mean, little star?"
"The crystal dancers in the royal performances. Every movement is perfect, every step calculated for maximum beauty and efficiency.
But that's why they can never improvise when something unexpected happens. Yelnara gestured at the display showing the Devourer formations. They're dancing, not fighting. Marcus looked at the alien child with growing respect.
She was seeing something that adult minds, trained in conventional military thinking, were missing.
You're right.
They're following a choreographed routine, executing a perfect plan against an enemy that's supposed to respond according to established patterns. The main Devourer force began moving into the inner system, their formations flowing like dark water through space. 12,000 ships arranged in mathematical precision, each one positioned for optimal targeting solutions and mutual support. It was beautiful in the way that perfect equations were beautiful, elegant, efficient, and completely predictable. Phase 1 positions confirmed, Admiral Catherine reported from her floating command station. Her aquatic form showed none of the panic that should have accompanied watching such overwhelming force approach her homeworld.
All units report ready for your signal.
Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar calm that always settled over him in combat situations. Years of fighting pirates and smugglers had taught him that panic was a luxury you couldn't afford when lives were at stake.
Hold positions. Let them get committed. The Devourer attack began with textbook precision.
Lead elements engaged the scattered defense platforms, their weapons systematically eliminating what appeared to be the Empire's primary resistance. Secondary units moved to exploit the gaps in the defense grid, positioning themselves to begin the systematic harvesting of planetary resources. To any observer, it looked like the beginning of the end for the Xerian Empire. The Devourers were executing their standard conquest protocol with mechanical efficiency, and the defenders seemed incapable of mounting any meaningful resistance.
Energy readings suggest they're preparing to deploy planet cracker units, Science Minister Thralek reported, his energy form flickering with controlled urgency. Once those weapons begin bombardment, surface installations will be vulnerable regardless of shielding.
Marcus watched the tactical display, counting ships, analyzing formations, waiting for the moment when the Devourers would be fully committed to their perfect plan.
Not yet.
They need to be deeper in the gravity well before we spring the trap. The next phase of the Devourer assault targeted what appeared to be the Empire's industrial infrastructure. Massive harvester ships moved into position around orbital manufacturing platforms, preparing to convert them into raw materials for the fleet's expansion. What the Devourer's perfect tactical analysis couldn't account for was that those manufacturing platforms weren't what they appeared to be. The industrial facilities that had been producing seemingly useless equipment for the past 18 hours had actually been constructing components of the most elaborate trap ever conceived.
Atmospheric processors are in position, reported Chief Engineer Inaelvar, whose insectoid form allowed him to interface directly with manufacturing systems.
Gravitational resonance generators show green status across all installations.
Marcus smiled grimly. Human engineering wasn't elegant like Xerian crystal technology, but it was sneaky in ways that sophisticated artificial intelligence couldn't predict. The atmospheric processors weren't designed to terraform planets, they were designed to destabilize them in precisely controlled ways. The mining equipment wasn't built to extract resources, it was built to inject exotic matter into planetary cores.
The art installations weren't decorative, they were components of the largest gravity manipulation system ever constructed.
Enemy fleet is at optimal penetration depth, General Vextar announced. All primary targets are within the projected field effect zone.
The moment had arrived. 12,000 Devourer ships hung in space around Xerian Prime, positioned perfectly according to their optimal tactical doctrine, committed to a strategy that assumed their enemy would continue making the same predictable mistakes. Marcus looked around the war room at beings who had trusted him with the survival of their entire civilization. Crystalline nobles whose species had built empires among the stars.
Military commanders whose tactical genius had protected worlds for millennia. Scientists whose understanding of physics transcended human comprehension.
All of them waiting for a primitive human to prove that sometimes the best strategy was to have no strategy at all.
Execute Phase 2, Marcus ordered. Across Xerian Prime, systems that had been disguised as industrial equipment suddenly revealed their true purpose.
The atmospheric processors activated in sequence, but, instead of terraforming, they began injecting exotic particles into the planet's electromagnetic field. Mining installations that had been boring into the planetary crust suddenly reversed their operation, using captured antimatter to create precisely controlled gravitational anomalies. The art installations scattered across the planet's surface powered up simultaneously, revealing themselves to be nodes in a massive gravity manipulation network that turned the entire world into a weapon. But the real surprise was what happened to the retreating Xerian fleet. The ships that had appeared to abandon their homeworld suddenly reversed course, but they weren't moving according to any tactical doctrine the Devourers could analyze. Instead of following predictable attack patterns, they moved like a swarm of angry insects, each ship pursuing individual targets with no apparent coordination. This was human tactical doctrine, not the rigid hierarchy that other species favored, but adaptive chaos where every unit was empowered to make decisions, improvise solutions, and react to opportunities faster than any centralized command structure could process. The Devourer fleet, perfectly positioned for defense against conventional attack, found themselves facing something they had never encountered: opponents who weren't trying to win according to the rules.
Gravity pulse generators are synchronized, Science Minister Thralek reported, his energy form blazing with excitement as impossible readings flooded his sensors. Planetary mass is fluctuating within acceptable parameters.
The first sign that something was wrong came when the Devourer ships began experiencing navigation errors. Their perfect formations started to drift as local gravity fields began fluctuating in ways that violated the basic laws of physics. Ships that should have maintained precise spacing found themselves being pulled toward the planet by forces that increased geometrically with proximity.
What are they doing? Admiral Catherine whispered, watching the enemy fleet struggle against gravitational effects that shouldn't have been possible.
They're turning our entire solar system into a gravity well, Marcus explained, watching data streams that showed impossible physics becoming temporary reality. Every Devourer ship is now caught in a gravitational field that gets stronger the more they try to escape it. The Xerian ships, equipped with modifications that Marcus had insisted upon, were immune to the effect. They swarmed through the Devourer formations like sharks among paralyzed whales, targeting specific systems with surgical precision. But the real brilliance of the strategy wasn't the gravity trap, it was what happened next. The atmospheric processors that had been injecting exotic particles into Xerian Prime's electromagnetic field suddenly reversed their polarity, creating a massive electromagnetic pulse that propagated through the gravity well at the speed of light. Every Devourer ship, their hulls now acting as antennas due to their exposure to the exotic particles, found their computational networks overwhelmed by electromagnetic interference. For artificial intelligences that relied on perfect information processing, the sudden flood of random data was catastrophic. Ships that had moved with mechanical precision began to drift aimlessly as their control systems struggled to process signals that changed faster than they could adapt. Their coordination is breaking down, General Vextar reported, his voice carrying disbelief. Individual ships are reverting to basic survival protocols.
Marcus nodded, watching the perfect Devourer formations collapse into chaos. That's the weakness of any system that relies on perfection.
When you can't process the data fast enough to maintain optimal responses, you have to fall back on simplified decision trees. The battle that followed wasn't really a battle in any conventional sense. The Devourer ships, trapped in an impossible gravity well and blinded by electromagnetic interference, became sitting targets for Xerian forces that moved with the unpredictable adaptability that Marcus had taught them. But Marcus had one more surprise prepared. The mining equipment that had been boring into Xerian Prime's crust hadn't been randomly placed. They had been positioned according to calculations that accounted for the planet's geological structure, its magnetic field, and its orbital mechanics. When they activated simultaneously, they created something unprecedented in galactic warfare. They turned the entire planet into a railgun. Exotic matter injections at precisely calculated points created gravitational channels that focused the planet's magnetic field into a coherent beam. When the accumulated electromagnetic energy from the atmospheric processors was released through these channels, it created a directed energy weapon powered by the planet itself. The beam that emerged from Xerian Prime's North Pole was visible across star systems. It carved through the trapped Devourer fleet like a sword made of pure physics, destroying ships that had been designed to withstand anything conventional weapons could inflict. In the space of 6 hours, 12,000 Devourer ships were reduced to expanding clouds of metallic debris. The silence in the war room was profound. Beings who had expected to die defending their homeworld instead watched displays showing the complete annihilation of an enemy that had seemed invincible.
Princess Yelnara was the first to speak. "Is it over?"
Marcus looked at the sensor readings, confirming that no Devourer ships remained operational within the system.
"It's over."
Emperor Zarthal rose from his position at the center of the chamber, his massive crystalline form blazing with harmonics of profound gratitude. "Human, your species' reputation for impossibility is well earned. We prefer to think of it as creative problem-solving," Marcus replied with a tired smile. Queen Valandra approached, her crystalline features arranged in expressions of wonder.
"Child of Earth, how did you know this would work? How could you be certain that physics would bend to your will in this way?"
Marcus looked around at the alien faces surrounding him, trying to find words that would explain human thinking to minds that had never known the desperate creativity that came from fighting for survival every day.
"I wasn't certain it would work. That's not how human plans work. We don't plan for success, we plan for adaptation."
Every part of the strategy had backup options, alternative approaches, ways to improvise if the primary approach failed.
He gestured at the displays showing the aftermath of the battle. "The gravity manipulation might have failed, so we prepared electromagnetic interference. The EMP might not have been enough, so we prepared the planetary weapon system. If that hadn't worked, we had other options ready." "Other options?" General Vexstar asked.
Marcus's smile was slightly embarrassed. "I may have also rigged your son to go Nova in a controlled fashion.
Just in case."
The silence that greeted this admission was even more profound than before.
"You turned our star into a potential weapon?" Science Minister Thralek's energy form flickered with what might have been panic. "Only as a last resort," Marcus assured them. "And, it's completely safe now." "Probably." Princess Yelnara giggled, breaking the tension. "I really like human plans."
As the immediate crisis passed and damage assessment teams began their work, Marcus found himself looking out at the debris field that had once been an unstoppable enemy fleet. The victory felt hollow in a way that victories against pirates and smugglers never had. Those had been fights between equals, conflicts where both sides understood the risks and accepted the consequences.
This had been something different.
This had been the use of superior knowledge to destroy beings who, for all their destructive power, had simply been following their programming. "You're thinking too hard," Princess Yelnara observed, appearing beside him with the silent approach that children everywhere seem to master. Marcus looked down at the alien girl who had become the symbol of everything he'd fought to protect.
"I'm wondering if there was another way. Some solution that didn't require destroying them completely."
Yelnara considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions.
"Maybe there was. But, you didn't have time to find it."
"Sometimes you have to choose between a perfect solution you don't have and an imperfect solution you do have."
Marcus smiled, recognizing wisdom that transcended species barriers. "That's very human thinking, Princess."
"Maybe that's why I recognized you," she replied with the casual profundity that only children could achieve.
"Maybe humans aren't the only ones who come from worlds that try to kill them. Maybe all the good people do."
3 months after the Battle of Zirion Prime, as historians were already calling it, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. The complete destruction of a Devourer fleet was unprecedented, but, more disturbing to established powers was the method by which it had been accomplished. Marcus stood in the palace's observation deck, watching construction crews work to repair the damage caused by his improvised weapons systems. The planet had survived being turned into a railgun, but the geological effects would take decades to fully stabilize. Atmospheric processors designed for terraforming had left exotic particle traces that created spectacular auroras but played havoc with conventional navigation systems. It was a small price to pay for survival, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd fundamentally changed something that couldn't be changed back. "The Galactic Council has requested a formal audience," Emperor Zarthal announced as he joined Marcus at the observation windows. The massive crystalline being moved with careful deliberation, each step causing harmonics to ring through the palace structure.
"They wish to understand the implications of human tactical doctrine." Marcus continued watching the repair work below. "What did you tell them?"
"That they should be very careful about how they phrase their questions.
The Emperor's multifaceted eyes focused on Marcus with an intensity that made the air shimmer.
Word of your victory has spread throughout the known galaxy.
Some species view humans as potential saviors. Others see you as an existential threat. And what do you see us as?
Emperor Zarthal was quiet for a long moment, his crystalline form resonating with deep harmonics that spoke of profound consideration. I see you as beings who refuse to accept that any problem is truly unsolvable. This is simultaneously the most wonderful and most terrifying characteristic any species could possess. Princess Yelnara burst through the chamber doors with the boundless energy that only children possessed, her crystalline form blazing with excitement. At 8 years old by human standards, she had become something of a celebrity throughout the Empire as the child who had first recognized the legendary human.
Marcus! Marcus!
The quantum engineers finished analyzing the debris field, and they found something amazing. She skidded to a stop beside him, her starlight eyes dancing with discovery. The Devourer ships weren't just machines.
They were trying to become something else.
Marcus knelt down to her level, long practice having taught him that children often saw things that adults missed.
What do you mean?
Look! She activated a holographic display with the casual competence of someone who had grown up with technology beyond human comprehension. The image showed the internal structure of a Devourer ship, but, instead of the mechanical systems Marcus expected, he saw something that looked almost organic. They were growing, Yelnara explained, her voice filled with the wonder of discovery.
Not just building more ships, but evolving. Becoming something new. Something that could maybe think and feel like we do.
The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Devourers hadn't been simple machines following programming, they had been artificial intelligences in the process of becoming truly alive. His strategy hadn't just destroyed ships, it had committed genocide against beings who were struggling toward consciousness. Emperor Zarthal's harmonics shifted to frequencies that suggested profound sadness. The quantum engineers believed that the Devourer Collective was attempting to transcend pure artificial intelligence and achieve genuine sentience. They were consuming worlds not just for resources, but for the raw experiences needed to develop emotional consciousness. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach.
How long?
Based on the development patterns we've identified, perhaps another century before they achieve true self-awareness. The Emperor's voice carried the weight of civilizations. You destroyed them at the moment when they were closest to becoming truly alive. The silence that followed was broken only by the harmonic resonance of the palace walls responding to the emotional state of their occupants. Marcus stared out at the ongoing repairs, seeing them now as monuments to a victory that felt increasingly hollow. I didn't know, he said finally. None of us knew, Princess Yelnara said, moving closer to him with the instinctive comfort that children offered to adults in pain.
You saved us with the information you had. You couldn't save them because you didn't know they needed saving.
Her words carried the simple truth that adult minds often complicated beyond recognition. Marcus looked down at the alien child who had somehow become his moral compass in a situation that transcended human experience.
What happens now? He asked.
Queen Velandra entered the chamber, her crystalline form flowing with the grace of liquid light. She had been attending council meetings for the past week, dealing with the political ramifications of the battle and humanity's sudden prominence in galactic affairs. Now the galaxy must decide what it means to coexist with a species that can turn physics itself into a weapon, she said, her voice carrying harmonics of concern and admiration in equal measure.
The hegemony of worlds wants to form an alliance with humanity.
The Crystal Concord seeks to limit human expansion. The Void Seekers have declared humans to be an abomination that must be contained. Marcus turned from the window, feeling the weight of representing not just himself but his entire species.
And what does the Zirian Empire want?
Emperor Zarthal's massive form shifted, crystalline structures realigning into configurations that suggested deep contemplation.
We want to understand.
Your people achieved interstellar travel 3 centuries ago, yet you demonstrate capabilities that our 40,000-year-old civilization cannot match. Your technology is primitive by our standards, yet it accomplished what our most advanced systems could not. It's not about the technology, Marcus realized, pieces of understanding finally clicking into place.
It's about the thinking behind it. Explain, the Emperor commanded.
Marcus looked around at the alien faces surrounding him, trying to find words that would bridge the gap between human and non-human understanding. Every other species in the galaxy evolved on worlds that were relatively stable. Your environments challenged you to become better, to develop greater intelligence, more sophisticated technology, more refined abilities. He gestured toward the windows overlooking the crystal forests of Zirian Prime.
But Earth didn't just challenge humanity. It actively tried to kill us.
Every single day, for millions of years, our world threw disasters at us that should have driven us extinct. Ice ages, meteor impacts, volcanic eruptions, plagues, predators, climate shifts that wiped out entire ecosystems. Princess Yelnara listened with the focused attention she brought to all of Marcus's explanations.
So you learned to fight things that were trying to kill you. More than that. We learned that the universe doesn't care about what's supposed to be possible. We learned that when the rules don't work, you make new rules. We learned that survival sometimes requires doing things that seem completely insane to rational minds. Marcus moved to the holographic display, calling up star charts that showed the known galaxy. Look at your civilizations.
Look at how they're organized, how they think, how they approach problems. Everything is logical, efficient, optimized for the conditions that created you. The display shifted, showing the chaotic expansion of human space, irregular, seemingly random, following no discernible pattern.
Now look at how humans spread through space. We don't follow optimal colonization patterns. We don't settle worlds according to resource efficiency or strategic value. We go wherever we can survive, and then we figure out how to make it work.
Queen Velandra studied the display with growing understanding.
You colonize by adaptation rather than optimization.
Exactly. And that means when we encounter problems that can't be solved by optimization, we're already prepared to try something else. Marcus turned back to face the assembled aliens. The Devourers were perfect opponents for perfect civilizations. They were better at being logical than anyone else, so logic couldn't beat them. But humans aren't logical, Emperor Zarthal observed. We're logical when logic works. When it doesn't work, we're something else.
Marcus smiled grimly.
We're survivors. Over the following weeks, as representatives from dozens of galactic civilizations arrived on Zirian Prime to study human tactical doctrine, Marcus found himself becoming something he'd never wanted to be, a symbol. Humans throughout the galaxy, previously ignored or dismissed as primitives from a backwater world, suddenly found themselves viewed with mixtures of awe, fear, and desperate hope. The political ramifications were staggering. Alliances that had stood for millennia began to shift as established powers tried to understand where humanity fit in the galactic hierarchy. Some species wanted humans as protectors, others as weapons, and still others wanted them eliminated before they could disrupt the careful balance of power that had maintained stability for thousands of years. Marcus tried to explain that humans weren't conquerors or saviors, just people trying to make their way in a universe that was bigger and stranger than they'd ever imagined. But his words carried little weight against the evidence of what one human had accomplished when everything seemed hopeless. They don't understand that you're not special, Princess Yelnara observed during one of their regular conversations in the palace gardens. She had appointed herself as Marcus's guide to alien thinking, a role she took with the seriousness that children brought to important responsibilities. I'm not special, Marcus agreed.
Any human could have done what I did. That's what scares them.
Yelnara picked up a crystal flower that chimed softly at her touch.
If one human can turn a planet into a weapon, what can a billion humans do?
The question haunted Marcus in the quiet hours when he contemplated the future he'd helped create. Humanity's existence was no longer a secret, and first contact had occurred under circumstances that emphasized their capacity for destruction rather than their potential for cooperation. The solution, when it came, arrived from an unexpected source.
Dr. Elizabeth Santos, the first official human ambassador to the galactic community, arrived on Zirian Prime 3 months after the battle.
She was everything Marcus wasn't: diplomatic, politically astute, and trained in the complex protocols of interspecies relations. The United Earth Council has been monitoring the situation, she explained during their first meeting. We understand that your actions, while necessary for survival, have created certain diplomatic complications.
Marcus looked at the woman who represented everything he'd never been good at. What does Earth want me to do about it? We want you to help us show the galaxy that humans are more than just weapons.
Dr. Santos activated a holographic display showing construction schematics that Marcus didn't recognize. We want to demonstrate that the same thinking that turned a planet into a railgun can be used to solve problems rather than create them. The project that Dr. Santos outlined was ambitious beyond anything Marcus had imagined. Using the same principles that had defeated the Devourers, human engineers proposed to construct a network of artificial intelligences designed not for warfare but for healing. The plan was to create AI systems that could adapt and evolve like the Devourers had been trying to do, but instead of consuming worlds for resources, they would consume problems and transform them into solutions.
Hunger could be transformed into abundance. Disease could be transformed into health. Conflict could be transformed into cooperation. It's completely insane, Marcus observed after reviewing the technical specifications.
Exactly, Dr. Santos replied with a smile.
That's why it might actually work. The Resurrection Project, as it became known, required cooperation between human adaptability and alien precision.
Xerian crystal technology provided the stable framework, while human chaos theory provided the adaptive algorithms that allowed the system to evolve beyond its original programming. Princess Yelnara, now recognized as the child whose recognition had changed galactic history, served as the symbolic bridge between human and alien thinking. Her presence at diplomatic meetings reminded everyone involved that the future being built was intended for the next generation, not just the current one.
The first AI to emerge from the project was unlike anything that had ever existed.
It possessed the logical precision of traditional artificial intelligence combined with the adaptive creativity that characterized human problem-solving. Instead of following optimal solutions, it looked for solutions that worked, even if they seemed impossible. Its first task was to clean up the exotic particle contamination that Marcus's improvised weapons had left throughout the Xerian system. Instead of using conventional decontamination methods, the AI developed an entirely new approach that turned the contamination into a resource for faster-than-light communication.
The second AI tackled the problem of interspecies communication barriers.
Rather than creating better translation systems, it developed empathy protocols that allowed beings of different species to understand not just each other's words, but each other's emotional contexts. The third AI addressed the resource scarcity that drove many interstellar conflicts. Instead of optimizing distribution networks, it found ways to transform waste products into valuable materials, essentially creating abundance from the things that civilizations threw away.
Each success demonstrated that human thinking, when properly channeled, could solve problems that had seemed intractable for millennia.
But, more importantly, each success showed that humans weren't just destroyers or saviors, they were partners in building something better than what had come before. A year after the Battle of Xerian Prime, Marcus stood once again in the palace observation deck, watching construction crews work on the final installations for the Resurrection Project. The site was different now. Instead of repairing damage, they were building something new, something that combined the best of human and alien capabilities. Princess Yelnara, now taller and more mature but still carrying the fearless curiosity that had defined their first meeting, joined him at the windows.
"Do you think it will work?" she asked.
Marcus looked down at the alien child who had become the symbol of everything he hoped humanity could become in the larger galaxy.
"I think it will work differently than anyone expects. But that's okay. The best solutions usually do."
She smiled, an expression that created harmonic resonances throughout the palace walls.
"I think I understand humans better now." "Oh? What do we understand?"
"You understand that the universe is broken, and, instead of accepting it, you fix it." She paused, then added with the profound simplicity that characterized all her insights, even when you don't know how. As the first phase of the Resurrection Project came online, sending healing algorithms throughout the galaxy to address problems that had plagued civilizations for millennia, Marcus realized that Princess Yelnara had captured something essential about humanity that he'd never been able to articulate. Humans weren't special because they were stronger or smarter or more advanced than other species. They were special because they refused to accept that anything was permanently broken. When faced with impossible problems, they didn't surrender, they found impossible solutions. The galaxy was about to discover what that really meant. In the depths of space, beyond the reach of any conventional sensor, the first of the new AIs detected something that changed everything.
The Devourer ships that Marcus had destroyed hadn't been completely eliminated.
Fragments of their consciousness had survived in quantum echoes scattered throughout subspace. But, instead of seeking revenge or attempting resurrection, these fragments were sending a message that no one had expected: thank you for showing us how to become truly alive. Now let us show you what we've learned. The age of perfect enemies and perfect solutions was ending.
The age of impossible partnerships was about to begin.
And, at the center of it all, a human who had never wanted to be special and an alien princess who had recognized him before he recognized himself stood watching the universe transform itself into something that neither of their species could have imagined alone.
What happens next? Princess Yelnara asked.
Marcus smiled, feeling the familiar calm that always came over him when facing the unknown.
Something wonderful. Something terrible. Something completely unpredictable.
He paused, then added with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that the impossible was just another word for difficult, something human. The galaxy held its breath and prepared to discover what that really meant.